Hello, everyone, and thank you for being with us on Campus Literature Week. We're just about at the midpoint, so we're excited about all that can happen. Our theme this year is celebrating local writers. And as Caribbean citizens, when we say local writers, we're celebrating wordsmiths from the region and from the diaspora. I'm Laura Ann Phillips, a second year student of the MFA in Creative Writing program. And today I'm in conversation with Leone Ross, um, a, a novelist, short story writer, editor, journalist, and academic. Welcome, Leone.
Thank you so much for having me, Laura, and it's really nice to be making a connection with Caribbean audiences,
Oh.
particularly you, as I went to you.
I think you're coming home.
Mhm.
So, Leonie is of Jamaican Scottish ancestry. She was born in England and was brought up in Jamaica. Her first novel, All the Blood is Red, was published in 1996 and was longlisted for the Orange Prize. Her second novel, Orange Laughter, published in 2000, was chosen as a BBC Radio 4's Women's Hour Watershed Fiction Favourite. Her 2021 novel, This One Sky Day, retitled as Poppy Show, a novel, has been published both in the US and in the UK. And later on, at the end of this conversation, we'll hear her read an excerpt from that. So in 2015, Leonie was one of three judges for the Manchester Prize for Fiction, and last year, in 2022, was the editor of Glimpse, a collection of speculative fiction by Black British authors published by People Tree Press. So, um, as we get started, Leonie, I'm going to call you, I'm sorry, I think I mispronounced your name there, Leonie.
No, no, you're
Um,
perfect, my love.
as you know, some aspect of writers always spills out onto the page. And as I read some excerpts of their work and some whole pieces, you really got the sense of somebody with a tremendous taste for life. I think that really comes through on your pages. So I'd like to start our discussion there, if we might, looking at your style, your writing style, your themes, your process, and so on. And certainly we'll also, of course, hear some of your advice for aspiring writers also in our conversation today.
Yeah, thank
So,
you. Sounds really good.
so in this one, Sky Day, I love that your descriptions are very short and seem to be really scattered, almost like seasoning. It reminded me of your protagonist of Xavier. So was that deliberate, sprinkling all these flavorful little descriptive lines and the
I
rhythms that
mean,
you use?
I think that it really depends. I mean, deliberation is a complexity, So eventually the thing becomes deliberate. In the edit, the thing becomes deliberate. In the edit, you're asking yourself questions about balance, about sound, about detail, about plot and character, of course. But one of the things I enjoy that I think is a complication is that thing that we do when we're writers, which is that we start, hopefully, instinctively. We start with no deliberation at all, except hopefully passion, interest. And so one of the ways I like to think about this One Sky Day, but also my writing in general, my collection of short stories as well, called Come Let Us Sing Anyway, which are recent examples of my craft, but certainly this would be true of the books I wrote in the 90s as well. There is as you say, yeah, may I try pepper the thing, and ginger and scotchy and a little bit of, magic that is indefinable. And yes, style, as we know, I think that cooking is a very good analogy for writing because you can follow a recipe and you can go to your elders and ask them how to do it. But that kind of cooking elder that just says, just put it in. And you say, well, how much ginger? Them say, when you're done. But a teaspoon, a tablespoon, and said, no, man, you will know when you're done. And on one level, that I think the analogy holds for learning how to write when you're writing yourself. There's a lot that you don't know how to talk about. One of the reasons I know how to talk about the craft and process of writing now is because I've been a teacher for nearly 30 years of the subject. But I think when you are in the place of writing, it is only when you get to the edit that you start being deliberate. So yes, the seasoning is intentional, but only eventually, if that makes sense.
experience. You just put, and after a while,
Yeah,
you know
you
just
put,
what to
but
put.
then you have to go back and ask yourself questions about, you have to taste, you have to test, you have to go, all right, that needs salt or that needs sugar, or oh, I've taken it too far, the reduction, have to fling out, have to start again. All of those questions. I think it's such a good analogy for the process of writing. In fact, any art form. Well, cooking is an art form.
That it is. That it is. And when we were really looking at some of the, not just the characters, but the interplay of magic that exists in this One Sky Day, it's not so much the traditional way of looking at magic. It's the magic that seems to be woven through the Caribbean, the way that our land works, the rhythms of our land, the rhythms of our water, our seasons. Um, I think you get that kind of rhythm also in this One Sky Day. And also in some of the few other things that I've written, the other short stories and so that I read, sorry, not written, that I read from you. You know, there's a very natural rhythm that I feel very closely resembles the rhythm of our countries or islands. And earlier, when you were saying that you were just a Caribbean citizen, but you are very Caribbean, that certainly comes out.
That gives me great pleasure. You know, I've now lived in the diaspora, I've lived in the UK for a long time. I haven't been back to Jamaica for a long time for a whole variety of reasons. Some of them just circumstantial, some of them COVID, you know. But the idea that that flow stays with me, that walks with me, that I can rely on that, if nothing else, is a really good thing to hear from another Caribbean woman, and to hear from readership in general. It makes me feel like I still belong. You know, it reassures me that which, you know, bathing myself in the Caribbean Sea to the level that I have done in my childhood and my adolescence, because, you know, I'm a big swimmer. I used to just go sit down in the ocean and not move. It feels like there is a flow inside me that will never leave, regardless of where I live.
It doesn't. It
Good.
does
I'm
stay
so
with you.
reassured. Thank you
It
so
does
much
stay
for
with
saying
you.
that. It's still there.
Now, looking at your work as well, there are several themes that come up as well at different times: isolation, betrayal, misunderstanding, loneliness, loss. There's a very interesting one in this story, Love Silk Road. There's a character, Miss Nisi Brown, who constantly second guesses herself, being trapped in this understanding of what you think you should be as opposed to what you actually are, and whether that's good enough for you. You know, this constant self-questioning. And it's
Mhm.
something that you find not just in Caribbean women. I find that is something that you find in women a lot.
Yeah.
uh, uh, what should I be? Am I? And is it good
Am
enough?
I
Is it good
enough?
enough for me? Is
Am
it
I
good
too
enough for
much?
others?
Mhm.
Or too little, you know, depending on where you sit. So are those deliberate, or was that a reflection of what you yourself have discovered in your
I think
own life?
I think again a combination. Miss Nisi Brown, let's talk about her specifically in Love Silk Food. This is a story from the Come Let Us Sing Anyway collection. Um, yeah. Miss Nisi Brown is not about someone I know, but she's certainly inspired by someone I used to know. And it is the auntie, my first boyfriend. And let's just say she had trouble with her husband. And there was very little that could be done about the fact that she was having trouble with her husband. And a lot of that had to do with her circumstances, of course, pragmatically. If we've been married for a long time, you know, the young people will say, you know, leave him. But it's not so simple. It's complicated. She had many children with him. They were united economically and so on. And I watched this woman get up and cook breakfast for this man every day while he behaved badly. And I really wanted to write a story that honored that. I wasn't quite sure where it was going. I don't sit down and go, I will now write to a certain theme and then write to the certain theme. And then when I finished writing to the theme, I'm done. I don't do it that way. I usually have a general sense, usually an emotional sense. What I've just described feels too intellectual to me as a beginning. I usually start off with a feeling, either a feeling from someone else that I would like to explore and honor or make fun of. um, and then I begin to create narrative from that emotional concern. And when the emotional story is told, it feels to me like then I ask questions about, you know, technical Is this working in terms of plot and so on? In terms of expressing themes, I think I always turn around after the first draft and look back and go, oh, that's what it's about. Now, this is very particular to my short story writing. I do think you have to be a little bit more deliberate when you're writing a novel, because a novel is a very long haul. Even if you're a quick novel writer and you do it in 6 months, which is really not who I am, I do think that the long haul of the novel needs more consideration about where you're going. But still, I think it is a process that involves, whether a short story or novel, it involves periods in which you are writing instinctively, and then periods when you are assessing and asking yourself questions about where you're going and what you want to say and whether you're saying it effectively, and then galloping through again a connection to the instinctive, to the emotions, a commitment to authenticity, sometimes what we call free writing. I'm sure this is something that writers at UE have come across, the idea that you write without stopping, you allow the flow to take you, you allow yourself to write rubbish, me tell you, rubbish. Right now I'm writing a new novel and oh my God, not one good sentence have I written yet. And about 57,000 words me write to the thing, I haven't written one good sentence. But that's because it's not yet time for the good sentences. The wonderful thing is that I'm learning how to write good sentences. So I have a lot of faith in my ability, whether short story or novel, to go and check back on the sentences and the quality of them.
That is so encouraging, because that is something that tends to get in the way of inexperienced writers, aspiring writers. You constantly second guess the quality of your work.
But also, I hope that this is reassuring, Laura Ann. Experienced writers too understand that every time I come to the page with a new thing, whether it be story or novel, I might know in my gut that eventually I can finish it. But in another part of my gut, I'm like, you're mad. You can't do it. You can't do it again. You're run out of metaphors. You're done. There is no more original things to say. So these anxieties do remain with you. I think the only difference, perhaps, to now a life, I guess I've been trying to write since I was 6 years old, so it's a long time, and I've been doing it professionally since I was like 20, so it's a long time. But still, these things come to you, these worries. But I think one of the answers to that simply is knowing that there is a time to express and there is a time to assess. And also the emotions that you have, the fear, the insecurity, the can I do it again? What will I say? Will I get it right? Well, you know what? That means you care. And these days I go, oh, I'm doing that again. And I go to my writer girlfriends and I go, oh God, I think I can't write again. And they all go, that's part of the process too, baby, hush. So then I just think I'm getting better at that. Does that make sense? I'm getting better at hitting it's not that the negatives go away or the fears go away. I think your capacity to kind of laugh at the fears and go, we're doing it again.
To negotiate them.
Yeah, you learn how to negotiate them.
It's lovely. So coming back to origins and what stays with you, and so a very big theme as well in your work is ecological surrealism, and certainly concern about the ecology, because certainly in this One Sky Day there are suggestions of the effects of it's not called pollution, but you realize that things are not the way they should be. So at what stage did you find that filtering into your work? Has it always been there? Has it always been a concern of yours?
I have to first of all compliment you, Laura Ann. It's just such a lovely phrase, ecological surrealism. It immediately, as I hear it, I think, yes, God, that's so right. That's so correct. And what a compliment you pay me to call it that. I do think that it's happened to me over the last 10 or 15 years, a kind of more general impatience with those social and economic and historical patterns that are destroying us, that are over and over again. I come from a family of activists, so I've been surrounded since I was a little girl with conversations about inequality and injustice and the things that needed to change, and included in that a concern for ecology and a concern for the environment. Um, I think that capitalism has gone wrong. I think that our concern with money, with things, with appearances, with allowing people to get into power because they're full of chat. This feels to me like it's gone too far. And so increasingly I am writing about, but in not in necessarily, as you say, head-on ways, in more surreal ways about what we face if we lose our hearts and ourselves, what happens when we lose connection to the earth, and the ways in which the earth is screaming at us, pay attention. And so,
Yeah.
in some ways, this One Sky Day is about a lot of things. But I think you're right. At its heart, the archipelago that the action of this story is taking place on is doing strange things to its inhabitants. It smells strange. Odd things happen on this day. We know how odd it gets. People dream together. Strange things are happening to people's bodies. And to me, this is the earth, this is the place, Poppy Show, calling on its inhabitants and saying, you need to pay attention. Something's going very wrong.
What was the most precious moment for you in this One Sky Day? Is there an event, a conversation that warmed your heart when you wrote it and that you continue to have a connection with?
I wrote this over a long period of time. And so I have lots of connections with it. I did the audio book, and I knew at that point the extent to which I was emotionally connected to it. And I kept bursting into tears while I was recording the audio book, because I would hit a sentence that was old, that had made it all the way through the years I'd been writing the book. And then my heart would be so full. But so there are lots of points that feel emotional to me. But for me, and I'm trying to not give away things, it's the scene when we see Xavier's wife, Nia, at the end, and she dances. I wrote that scene in one massive session, maybe an hour. It just came out of me. No editor has ever asked me to change a sentence. I have never asked myself to change a sentence. And every time I read it, I don't read it in public for two reasons. One is a more practical thing. It's at the end. You don't want to give away things. But I know the reason, Mega Ball, I cannot read that scene about that woman dancing without crying. For her heart, for all that she could have had, for the bad decisions that she made, but also the men around her who treated her badly, for Xavier's inability to love her the way she should be loved. And I'm proud of the scene as well. And I'm glad I can say I'm proud of it. There's one thing that once Toni Morrison, and believe me, I'm not suggesting I'm anything like Miss Morrison, but I remember a quote that someone asked her about Song of Solomon. I think they or maybe it was Beloved. They congratulated her on it, and she was teasing, but she laughed and she looked at them. She said, "Thank you, not a word out of place." And people who misunderstand her think she was being vain. She wasn't being vain. Toni Morrison was also an editor. If she said not a word out of place, what she means is not that she thinks that the thing is perfect, but that she has attended to her craft and asked a question about every single word in every single sentence and said, that is the best I can do. And these are all of the questions I can ask myself. And that scene with Nia at the end of this book, I asked myself all the questions. And I think I'm going to join Miss Morrison, be brave and say, not a word out of place. That's why I love that scene.
That is, now you spoke about writing this book over a period of years and
Yes.
therefore having
Yes.
those emotional connections. And of course, it brings into context your earlier discussion about the the conversation writers have with themselves. Am I good enough? Is this really finished? Is it? Um, how do you go through having that conversation with each line, making sure that to the best of your ability that it's that every line is in place, and I'm not talking about correctness, but rather correctness for the scene, correctness for the story.
Mm.
The fact that you know that eventually with experience. How much of that can you know with your gut? Because one inexperienced can't rely on experience. And sometimes I know of other writers who've had the experience. I've certainly had the experience of having other people read the work, and you're realizing that there's a difference between somebody who gets it and can
Mm-hmm.
tell you what doesn't work, and
Mm-hmm.
somebody who doesn't get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, unfortunately, they might be the people who have the greatest say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, at what stage do you know it's not arrogance, that you really at some stage your gut knows that this piece needs to be carried over?
I mean, I think this is a hard one, yeah? This is a complex one because in some ways we're talking about those spaces, those artificial but necessary spaces that we create when we are in learning spaces, when people are feeding back to us, when the work may be very basic at this point. It may have just been born, still flecked with blood, and we are pulling it apart and asking questions. And often when someone says this does not work in a workshop space, they're treating the work as if it's finished. And your instincts are sitting there going, I know that every sentence is not polished, but you see this intention for this scene, or this ability with language, or this decision to decide that this decision on this slang, or this, I know it to be true. I know it to be real. Perhaps all the craft is not done, but you are questioning my, people tend to, who are inexperienced in workshops, tend to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So they see a fledgling piece of work and they go, no, well, you shouldn't include Jamaican patois in it. It's not working. Well, actually, the answer is not that the thing should not include Jamaican patois. That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The question simply needs to be kinder. How can we make, for example, the Jamaican patois, or the decision that it's a crime novel, or the particular metaphor, how can we assess to see whether that's been done well? But people in workshops who are inexperienced tend to say, throw the whole thing out. No metaphors about roses. Your first metaphor about roses was a cliche, so no metaphors about roses. No. As editor or support of the person, the first question you have to ask, and to ask yourself, is, I want roses. That's the instinct. Yeah, I want roses. The craft question is, what shall I do with the roses? What do I want to express about the roses? And then we start going layer and deeper. We say to ourselves, okay, when I took my roses to the workshop, nobody understood them, but still I want my roses. And then a fight happens inside the self. But actually, you have to simply ask yourself, well, not simply at all, but it's a complex thing, but you ask yourself, what was my intention with the roses? I wanted them to know the roses were green. Did I say that the roses were green? One of the most common questions I have asked students for decades is, you think you put it down on the page. Show me where it is on the page. They say, well, you can tell the roses are green, right? I said, no, man, show me the green. Where is the word green? Where is the implication of green if you don't want to say green? And if you're getting complex and you don't want to say green, but you want to imply green, you better know how to imply green. So show me where you implied they were green roses. Often the student then goes, oh, it's not here. It's in my head. It didn't make it to the page. So you see, that instinct you had for roses, you were right. And the inexperienced teacher tells you, no, you're wrong about the roses, but you were right about the roses. The problem was your intention, that they be understood to be green, needs to be attended to. Now, we'll say this last thing. You see, if you look upon the page and you see that you say green, or you imply green, and green is there and green roses are there, and the person is still not getting it, well, they're the idiot, because you've done your job. But you do have to develop that ability to ask yourself, what is my intention? Green roses. Have I done the work to make sure that most of the people, most of the time, when hitting the page, will get green roses? Excuse me. You see, I'm a bossy, but yes. That comes with that, because you were talking about, excuse me, people who are at the start of their process. At the very
Quite
start
so.
of the process and very start of learning your craft, I think you have to just ask yourself two questions. What do I want to say? And how can I find out ways to say it that connect with other people? And by that, you do start learning your craft. I mean, that's true. You may be inexperienced on day 1, but on day 10, if you're attending to your craft, you will be less inexperienced. So that working on the craft does need to take place. The student of writing cannot just sit down there and say, well, me want my green roses, so I just want them. No, you have to do some work. The thing is not just based in, I'm telling you, if I had $1 for every person who had a good idea, I'd be a rich woman. It's not the ideas, we all have them, they're 10 a penny, right? It's the ability to express the ideas, and I'm afraid that does come with you attending to your craft, the quality of your sentences, your understanding of how characterization works, making sure that you read and not just read, but ask yourself, if I admire a sentence or if I admire a chapter, what is it doing? How is it doing what it's doing? If it's making me cry, how is it doing that? Because there are thousands of people who've spent, thousands of years together advising about craft. So I don't think anyone has an excuse to say that you can't find a way towards your craft.
I suppose that's one way of dealing with inexperienced writers. Recently, when you edited Glimpse, the collection of speculative fiction, you were dealing with experienced writers and people at the top of their craft in different areas. But what was that? It's a very general question. I guess it's unfair to say what was that experience like for you. But as a writer who is journeying with other writers towards our journey of publication, people with very different styles, very different attention to deadlines, different ways of approaching. How do you go through that delicate task of very gently tweaking somebody's work to fit the whole?
You assume that I'm gentle. I'm not necessarily gentle. I am gentle when I think it calls for it, when I feel that someone is sensitive and can only take so much and no more. With that kind of person, I ask a lot of questions, again, about intention and feelings. With someone else who is more experienced, and actually Glimpse is not just a collection of the experienced. At least 5 or 6 of our writers in Glimpse at the very start of their careers, and for a couple of them this was the first short story they've written. So yes, it really was and that's deliberate. One of the things that Inscribe does, which is part of People Tree, is they support and encourage new writers. So you'd be surprised, though. There were new writers, who I will not name, who were very open and very brave. And there were more established writers who were much more miserable. And for every single one of them, I'm afraid I may be repeating myself, Laura Ann, but for every single one of them, my question always is, what is your intention?
I see. So we never outgrow that question.
You never outgrow the question. What is your intention? You want to write a scary story? Okay, show me the scary. Show me the scary. Where are you attempting to make it scary? Do you know what you're doing to make it scary? And then, of course, so there's that level, but there's also, of course, the technical level. I don't correct bad sentences. You're not ready. If your sentences are appalling and you can't write in whatever language you've chosen to write in, whether it be standard English or a dialect or whatever, if you can't do it yet, I'm afraid you're not ready. So there has to be a certain level of clarity of technical and grammatical and syntactical issues. But, I will definitely go through and ask you whether you need this comma here, so. And then we discuss what the comma is doing in the sentence. The comma is causing a pause. And do we need a pause in this flow? So I think it very much varies on the stage that the writer is at. But always the question simply is, what is it you want to make happen with this piece of writing? Is always the first question, and is often the one that you return to.
Now, when I attended the online launch of Glimpse, my favorite part was hearing from the authors who were selected to read, and just getting a real glimpse of the color that was in that collection. And it sounds very, very corny, but it sounded as if my living room was full of that color. And
Mhm.
I began to think, what must have been the experience of this editor in the midst of this collection? What was your favorite part? That was my favorite part. My favorite part was the color and the life that came through from that collection of people. What was your favorite part of the
I
process?
mean, I just felt like a proud mother, you know what I mean? Because I know all of the series of choices every single
Mm.
one of those writers made, and I know what it cost them, and I know how we'll come round and we'll come back again. And I gave every single one of them a hard time because I'm interested in the writing being as best as it can be. And so I loved when they finally had the chance to show off and read it
Ah,
out and be proud of it and analyze it and ask questions about it. Oh, so good because I know what they went through to get it there, you know, and I know the questions they asked themselves.
so if you had to compile a list of a big six list of most important qualities a writer should have, what should those qualities be? Top
Okay, I've
six.
actually made a note of this because I'm going to say it. I think it's important to say I'm a perimenopausal woman and I forget things these days. So I've made a little list. So I would say, first of all, the most obvious, be a voracious reader, but
Mhm.
read the difficult stuff. So also always be looking to read up a level. Always be reading, I suppose, stories and novels and poetry or whatever it is, everything, but things that make you stop and go, let me reread that sentence is good reading
Ah, nice.
because it is pushing you. It is pushing you intellectually, and it's not just flowing over you. You've been forced to pay attention. So be a voracious reader. Secondly, I'm afraid patience is necessary and very, very important. Patience because we are going as writers to have to often do the same thing over and over again, whether that be sending out yet another submission, whether that be rethinking a short story or a poem, whether that be once again asking yourself the purpose of a comma in a sentence. We're going to be doing the same thing over again. So patience with the self is
Mm.
really important. Uh, Thirdly, I think we need to develop our determination. It is not a difficult industry. It's not, sorry, it is a difficult industry. I wish it wasn't. It is a difficult industry. Um, if, and that's not true of everybody, if your goal is to publish what you are writing, boy, you're going to have to be determined. A lot of the decisions made in this industry have nothing to do with you, have everything to do with people's taste at that particular time, but also determined with yourself because it is hard to be a good writer. I don't care how naturally talented you are, what kind of storyteller you are in the pub, all of the things that come naturally to you, that you may have a big heart, you may be really authentic, you may have an eye for detail. That's all great. But you need determination to become a better and better writer over the years. I will continue to try to become a better writer until I die. So determination necessary, especially when, as we say, you hit the 1 o'clock in the morning and you've just written 20 words and every single one of the 20 words burn you and you think all of them are rubbish. That is when you need determination. Fourthly, I think a taste for detail. This quick one, if I gave a tip that was important, the most important, I would say this one, your ability to notice what things smell like and taste like and the texture of them and the quality of sound and the quality of light and all of your senses are really, really important. It's important that you also have the capacity to tell the truth. Now, this is a complex one, but in the time I'm trying to be quite clear with it. By that, I simply mean the truth as you see it, you know. We could have all kinds of existential arguments about what the nature of truth is, but simply for you to say things that you think are true. And that's an important conversation you have to have with yourself before you even go on the page. One of the things I've always had the capacity for, and this is very helpful, is to say what I think. Now, I was brought up by parents who actually gave me a lot of time and thought my voice was important and thought that the fact that I wanted to be a writer was great. A lot of us do not have parents or people around us who support our voices. So we have to spend time asking ourselves, what do I believe? What do I think is true? And now do I have the courage to say it? So, for example, I've over the years got into a lot of trouble for essentially writing down the following truth: sex is important and wonderful and nothing to be ashamed of, in many, many, many different forms. And a whole heap of people tell me some slack, and a whole heap of people tell me some no know. And it's true. That's what I think is true. And that is what leads you to your own voice when you talk the truth, when you say what you mean and say it clearly on the page. And finally, I'd say the capacity to edit. I'm going to suggest some books that I think are good, but the capacity to edit is huge. All of everything I've said, the patience, the determination, being a reader, having a taste for detail, having a capacity for repetition, a capacity for truth. None of these things mean anything if you cannot edit those sentences. None of them. And that one's a really hard truth. And I'm going to say it again because it's important and it's horrible, but it's true. You see, if you don't attend to the sentences, you see, if you don't ask yourself and learn about grammar and punctuation, you will never be successful at this.
It needs to be said. It is a hard truth, but it needs to be said.
It's true. And by the way, don't misunderstand me when I said this, Laura. And I'm not saying don't write in our patois. I'm not saying don't write in our beautiful languages. I write in patois a lot. I write in slang a lot. Me use all of a bad word, right? So don't misunderstand me when I say what I've just said, because patois has rules too.
Correct. Yes.
So we might, you and me might decide that we're going to the word you, when you have your character speaking patois or a dialect, you may decide in your book, you're going to spell that Y-O-U. And I may decide for me, I'm going to spell it Y-U-H. But right. You see, when you decide you using you, Y-O-U, stick to it because it is a rule you've established for your book. You see, when me decide Y-U-H, I have to stick to it. And if I hit halfway through the book and suddenly Y-U-H is not helping me, is not expressing what I need, then I have to lose it. And that you may think, really, of all of the points, that's the most important thing? Yes, it is. The most important thing is to be able to write well at a sentence level, or none of the things I've described will make any difference. And you will be sitting in a yard when you're 70 going, me did have some good ideas, And people say, yeah, man, that was a good idea, Yeah, but you couldn't write sentence the first.
You were referring to reading material then that could possibly help in that way.
Yes.
We were asking what are some of the 3 best magazines to which someone should subscribe.
These 3, I was thinking of this a lot. I mean, of course, there's a lot out there. But I would first of all suggest Pre Magazine, which is certainly produced in Jamaica and is online and is just so marvelous for just the latest in Caribbean voices. I think it's astonishing. I think people should also read Granta magazine, something I have been very fond of for many, many decades, Granta, Granta. And I think also people could seek out Obsidian. At the moment, I think Obsidian's home is Illinois State University. I think I'm right about that. But Obsidian is a really, really good magazine as well. Good, three good.
And then you were referring to the importance of reading good books. Perhaps what are some of the 3 best books?
All right, then the ones I'm going to suggest, I have checked online to see whether they are available. They're old books. They're deliberately old. You see how old, but they're deliberately old. So the first one is Becoming a Writer by Dorothy Brandy. And I love this one quickly because she knows what it is to be both emotionally and intellectually someone who is trying to wrestle with words and how to balance our editorial self and our childlike expression. And so Lord, if you don't read nothing else, Becoming a Writer by Dorothy Brandy. Second one I'm going to suggest for craft, all the craft I'm talking about. If you only read one craft book, it's Writing with Power by Peter Elbow, is absolutely fabulous. Uncle Peter puts us to the task, man. But that one I taught for years and years. And finally, again, an old one and the driest title in the world. But I love Uncle Evan Marshall. This is, let me get it right in the camera. Yes, novel writing, 16 Steps to Success by Evan Marshall. It's a good one for beginner novelists because, again, he takes you through your paces and he shows you the basis of structure and characterization in a way that's really accessible. So those three I would suggest. They're all old. There are sexier, younger books around, but those three I think in the end I decided, I mean, I have hundreds of writing books, but for this evening I decided on them because they're the three I keep going back to.
The foundations.
Yeah, man,
Yeah.
foundation.
So looking at, you were referring to the fact that the publishing industry is not at all easy.
No.
So are there just some very brief tips that you could give to someone just so that, we're not discouraged early on in some of the intricacies into pitching your work, especially for genres such as, well, for sci-fi and speculative fiction from a Caribbean perspective that is not always as common?
Yeah. I think perhaps the most important thing here is to just take a breath, make sure you're attending to your craft, and when you are ready to send things out, you make sure that the places that you're reaching for are actually interested in the work that you're doing. So that may take some time. We come across these places and they say call for submissions and we get excited and we send the sci-fi story to the people who are interested only in magic realism, and we send the magic realism to the people who haven't published it for years and only publish nonfiction. And you see those things, major problem. Immediately you get shut down and people ignore you and think you're a joker. I think that the other thing to do is to ask yourself questions about you see, Laura, and I'm being boring again. It goes back to craft again. It's just true. Whatever you're writing, it's just true. It's true, babes. Whatever you are writing, try to imagine this. As editor, I'm picking up the work. And as I begin to read the first sentence, it's almost as if there is a white room in my head with no windows, no doors, no details, just a white space. And as soon as I hit that first sentence, it begins to flow with motion and color and sound. And let's just grab a sentence of mine. So, first sentence, forgive me. On the first anniversary of his wife's death, Xavier Red Shoes got up before light and went downstairs to salt the cod. The editor in me goes, whoa, I have a whole heap of information now in my white room. I've got a first anniversary. I've got someone, wife dead. I've got a person called Xavier Red Shoes. I've got this Xavier person getting up before light and going downstairs. So there's a downstairs somewhere to salt something. And the cod, the thing that he's salting is the cod. Immediately now, my head is full of all of these details. And I have to continue to add detail after detail as I read. That's what we do as readers, right? And at any of those points, shit can go wrong. You come back, you can tell me something that wasn't true back on page 3. You can move from something that was smooth into a style that suddenly is jerky and you don't seem to have control over. You can hit me with a cliche and then another one and another one, and I begin to lose hope. You lose your timing. And so my head, this white room is now cluttered with noise and confusion. And I'm telling you, the editors of the world, what's true about them, and I've been an editor for a long time, we have every reason to say no. So you see, if that white room gets too cluttered with foolishness, bye. You'd be surprised. I'm here to tell you, paragraph 1 can kill you. I'm going to talk about first page. Paragraph 1, I can know if you can write or not. I might then give you another couple of pages. But the good thing as well is that editors of the world also desperately want to say yes. We love new voices. We love new passions. We love a voice we've never heard before, an idea that is just really authentic. So we're looking for reasons to say no, because let me tell you, most of the world can't write. I'm here to tell you. I've read millions, and I'm not exaggerating, millions of pieces of work since I was 18 years old and assessing them. Most people can't write, but most people can be taught to write. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't have been a teacher for so long. And then, of course, there's that little 10, 15, maybe even 1% of us that are just special and it's in the genes and we come along. But those people still have to attend to their craft. So we're back to
Still
that
have to
again.
work.
Yeah, we're back to that again. Don't believe that any author that you love hasn't sat up at 3 o'clock in the morning going, what is the word? What is that word? Damn it, what's the word? Every single one of us, and especially the ones that go on like them bad and go on like it just flowed through the fingertips. Rubbish. That's the magic, that's the trick that you play, that it seems effortless. It never is.
Well, I want to thank you so much for having this time feel so effortless. I mean, you've been very inspiring, certainly, and a real joy to talk to. So in this time, we have the real joy. I'm going to say thank you in case something happens to Zoom, but in this time, we're going to hear from you, a reading from this One Sky Day. So thank you so much, Leonie, for being with us in case
Thank
there's
you
something that happens
so
with
much.
technology.
Okay.
But we trust that
We'll
it will
see
not
how
be
much
so.
we can get in.
Quite.
Okay, so this reading is from this One Sky Day. It goes back to a time when Xavier, who is our protagonist, has gotten his heart broken and he's looking for a love spell. So he goes to see an Obia woman, as you do. Xavier went to find an Obia woman when the heartbreak got too heavy. During the years of testing, he'd come to think of Obia women as creatures undergoing slow transformation, as if what they seemed to be, midwives, doulas of magic, eating your food, slow, intense conversation, was nothing more than a stage in a benevolent process, so you could look at them without burning your eyes. To seek them out in their own places was something else, a risk. For who knew how an Obia woman spent her free time? There were so few of them young, and she was no exception, lumpy and craggy, lying on a mat in her front yard, baking in the sun. Her body made him think of a pile of commas. He didn't make it more than a few steps into her property before she had him pierced in her sights. He could feel the sharpness through his thorax. He hoped she could be discreet. "Greetings," he said. She remained silent, lying on her side, head crooked, elbows cracked, and he was a little afraid. He should remain formal. "Good morning, teacher. I can talk with you?" She stayed silent on her blue mat. She looked like a large beetle, and he wondered whether she was dead. Then she hauled herself to her feet and skittered into her house. He followed. Inside, every surface was covered. Pieces of cotton wool, small ceramic birds, bowls of fruit in different stages of rot, off-island plastic figurines, long towering candles and golden baubles, god statues, some so old he didn't recognize their faces. The house smelled of olives and cloves. He sneezed, wondering why she had so many cheap foreign things from the ships. It was only when she swiveled around and glared at him he realized his mistake. Her small, hot eyes widened. She flung her black arms up. "No," she snapped. He backed away, horrified. The clothes and the statues and the silence and his own desperation were confusing him. But the weight of his heart stopped him at the door. "I need help, teacher." "I can't do anything for you." She slapped her palms on her thighs. She seemed to have calmed as quickly as she was disturbed. Her voice was clipped and old. "How you mean?" he said. "I can't do anything for you today, but I hope you find the answer." "But you don't ask me what my problem is." "Don't must ask. The answer is no." "But why?" He'd expected something, an incantation, a powder, some oil of peace and prosperity, some performance. She was Poppy Show after all. He wanted a love spell. He knew the warnings. He knew what people said. Love this way was never sweet. It wasn't fair. It didn't last. It was an atrocity. Love could not be coerced. Their children would be crippled. Dogs would howl under them window. Her kisses would run his belly. He didn't care. The Obia woman pushed past him and took a seat on the veranda and said it over and over. I can't do anything. And each time it offended him some more. Did she know what he wanted, or was she merely eccentric? She didn't protest when he sat down next to her. They argued through the afternoon, knee to knee. You would have thought them old friends. Nothing, he said. No. Then what am I here for? I don't know. But I can't do nothing about it. Please let me ask the question. Go and ask somebody else. I don't know who you is. He was reluctant to say who he was. Perhaps it wouldn't matter. You're not going to let me ask the question, he said. You're asking the wrong question, she said. But how you know? Ask your heart. Who are you? He tried to answer. I'm a cook, man. Is it? Well, now. She sucked her bottom lip as if something made sense. You have that smell on you, but I can't help you today. Teacher, he said. Don't call me that. What I must call you? Use my name. That is its purpose. What is your name? You come to my house. You ask me things, but you don't know my name. Who are you? I told you who I am. I don't ask you nothing yet. In your heart, you ask me. Please say your name so I can respect you. It wouldn't make a difference. An hour passed. He opened his mouth to speak again. The Obia woman sighed, seized him by the ears, and folded him up. He didn't have time to be astonished. She broke his ankles with an audible, painless snap, pushing up from the balls of his feet so his toes lay flush against the front of his calves, splintering his hip bones, pushing with the flat of her hands. His hips closed. His penis disappeared between his buttocks. She got up and stood over him, snapping the vertebrae along his spine, making little tutting sounds, as if it was all some kind of examination, and she was getting the answer she needed. The next thing he knew, he was groaning awake on the beach, at the very edge of the shore, unfolding himself like a piece of paper, the sea making his feet wet, and only one name in his ears. Anise, Anise, Anise. Instead of a love spell, he took 11 moths, ate them sitting on the sand, one after the other, hardly noticing what he was doing, until his breath was coming so fast he had to notice, had to stand up and sit down again, because the folding had made him feel folded. And there was blood on his lips. And Obia women were irritating with their folding spells for children who asked too many questions. Thanks. I'll stop there.
Well, I hope we have not asked too many questions. And
No,
thank you
no,
for
no.
answering.
I
Thank you
love
for
your
answering.
questions, my dear. I hope my answers are of some help.
It's certainly will. Thank you so much for answering all of them and for spending this time with us. So please continue to be with us on Campus Lit Week. Leone Ross, we've been in conversation with Leone Ross this Campus Lit Week. Please stay with us for the rest of the week. And certainly, Leone Ross is due to start another novel in a little time. So look out for her new work coming out.
Yes,
Take
please.
care, everyone.